You're such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about the baby-faced butchers. This is a solved case, but it takes a lot for grown-ups to ask for help. So what happens when they are refused that help? What occurs when no one believes how bad it really is until it's too late? In this case, there's a missing girl, a brutal murder of a man, and the arrest of two different people. What was really to blame, and could anyone have stopped this? By the way, I post so much content like this. It is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. I also want to thank our sponsor, Casetify. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this military grade protection phone cases because of how popular they really are, but they're popular for good reason, because you don't have to sacrifice the safety of your expensive phone for style, and you can really get 2-in-1 with Casetify, which is why I love it. So this is my favorite case. I love these because they are antimicrobial, meaning that they are keeping the germs away, keeping it clean, and they are also partially made from recycled plastic. So because this is such a nice phone case that you don't have to fear dropping, I want to do a little drop test for you. My phone is fine. It is not cracked at all, and it won't be when I throw it. So I'm going to step up here on my couch, and I'm just going to drop it. Hopefully not on my cat. So, ready? And now look at it. And it's completely okay. Nothing is wrong with it. If you want to get a case of your own, you can get the Powerful Women one like this one. You can get the Mental Health Matters one, or you can create your own. There's so many more on the website. You can get 20% off if you go to casetify.com/BrookeM. That's casetify.com/BrookeM, and that will be linked down below. So thank you to Casetify for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1997 in New York, and the Abdallah family lived in New York City. They lived actually in Central Park, near the park. They lived in this beautiful apartment. This was parents Angelo and Catherine, and they had a daughter named Daphne. Now, Angelo was actually a kind of a food company executive. Basically, he was high up in this food chain that was kind of international, so he did make pretty good money, and his wife was a French-born model. She was so beautiful, so talented, and so they did really well for themselves. They lived in an apartment adjacent to Central Park, so they got the best views, and they were more than comfortable as a family. They were extremely wealthy, could basically buy themselves anything that they wanted, and they were used to luxury, comfort, and the best of the best. But money doesn't buy you everything, and it doesn't buy you the ability to steer clear from the evil of the world. So on the early morning hours of May 23rd of that year, there was commotion outside of their bedroom window, and this was at Central Park. There were ambulances as well as police cars with their sirens on, headed right inside directly to Strawberry Fields. They had no idea what was going on, but somebody was dead. There had been a murder there. A man was found floating in the lake, and once they were able to fully pull him from the water, investigators found that he had been stabbed several times, but it was even more than just the stabbing. This man had been mutilated. It appeared as though he had the slash from ear to ear, as though someone was trying to decapitate him. He also had markings on his hands, as though somebody was trying to take off his hands. His abdomen had been cut open to the point where his intestines were actually spilling out, and this murder really did appear to be overkill. As investigators brought him in for an autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that he'd been stabbed over 70 times from head to toe. There basically wasn't a portion of his body that wasn't injured, and he was finally identified. He had zero identification on him, but his fingertips did reveal him to be a 44-year-old named Micheal McMorrow. Now, He was a New York City resident. People from the area knew him, and investigators began searching for his friends and family in order to pick a timeline to start looking into as to how he could have ended up murdered in the lake in Central Park. They also wanted to find out who exactly Michael was, and from his friends and family, they found that he was actually a pretty successful real estate agent in Manhattan, and he also was one to frequent the park. So when he got off work at night, he would kind of go drink, kind of hang out with some friends, walk around, look at the nature, and he did that to relax, so he was often at Central Park. He lived with his 80-year-old mother, Margaret. He didn't have a wife, didn't have a girlfriend, didn't have children. He basically had no strings attached to him. He just lived his life freely, and that's how he kind of liked to live. There were bottles of alcohol littering the ground where Michael had been found, which made sense if he was someone who would go to the park to drink, but there was also too many for it just to be from one person. So the question was, could this amount of overkill have been from a stranger? Most of the time, seeing a murder so brutal meant that it had some sort of passion behind it and probably some sort of connection as well. But it could have also been that Michael met someone that night that wanted him dead, and that possibly he didn't know them before that night. But even then, why would this person have wanted to murder him? Well, investigators had actually been called to this scene very early that morning. So it was the early morning of May 23rd. So this had approximately occurred the late evening of May 22nd. But the call came in at around 1:34 in the morning, and this was an anonymous call about a drowning. The caller said that there was a body in the lake, yet they didn't want to leave a number or a name where they could be reached again for further comment. But there had been a call that had been placed to 911 earlier. This was about an hour earlier at 12:47 a.m. This was from a father who couldn't find his daughter. He was calling to report her missing because she had not come home yet that night, and since she was going through a lot of things as a teenager, which we will get into in a little bit, they wanted to make sure that she was okay. So they wanted to report her missing so people could start looking for her. Now, this was a 15-year-old girl, and when they went to talk to her father, they entered an apartment. They were talking to him in the lobby of the apartment about details about her to search for her. And that is when the doorman of this, luxury apartment in New York overheard them talking and said, "Actually, I know where your daughter is." To everyone's surprise, they turned and they asked him what he was talking about, and he informed them that he had seen Daphne Abdella just a few moments earlier. She had come right through the doors, and she was with her boyfriend, and they also were kind of bloody. And when he asked them why, they said they had gotten into an accident while rollerblading. But he said that they had gone to the washroom, which was in the lobby area, the ground floor of this hotel, and they should have still been there. So they immediately headed to this area. Sure enough, Daphne and her boyfriend were in this washroom. In fact, they were completely naked in a bathtub together. And Daphne spoke up first, saying the exact same thing that the doorman had said, that they had gotten into this rollerblading accident, and so they had gotten a little bloody and they wanted to wash up before going back to the apartment. So since there were corroborating statements, investigators were like, okay, at least this girl isn't really missing. So even though it was a waste of time to look for this missing girl, they were happy that she wasn't really in danger. And so they escorted these two teenagers back to their apartment, and shortly after, Daphne's boyfriend's parents picked him up from that apartment, and they kind of went their separate ways for the night. After dealing with this, investigators then received that second call for the night that came in around 1 a.m. This was the one about the body being in the lake, and this time it wasn't going to end as happily or as easily because the caller didn't tell the name or the address of, who they were, where they could be located, and they left the tip anonymously, so they didn't know how this person knew that someone had drowned there. And since they had no information to go on, and they feared that this may have some sort of foul play involved. They decided to trace this tip to the location where the phone call had been made. And this led them straight back to the apartment that they had just come from an hour earlier, right next to Central Park. The one where the father had reported his daughter missing, but she wasn't really missing. They quickly realized that the missing girl, Daphne Abdallah, was actually involved in a murder case in the same night because she had made that phone call to investigators. They were confused at how this girl could have been missing, found, and involved in a murder case in one night at 15 years old until they realized just what they had seen an hour prior. 2 teenagers washing blood off of themselves in secrecy. Yet they were only kids, they couldn't be killers, right? Well, they found Daphne in her kitchen calmly eating mac and cheese, and they began to question her. And she spoke up almost immediately, claiming that her boyfriend killed a man and she had witnessed it. Now, she said that her boyfriend, who was Christopher Vasquez, who was also 15 years old, was responsible for all of this, and she wanted to make it right by telling investigators. Christopher Vasquez was known to be quite a nerdy boy. He didn't have many friends. He kept to himself. He had that, nerdy style, if you want to say that. And he was quite poor. So really his style came more from necessity than from showing who he really was. And he also suffered from mental illness, anxiety and depression plagued him, and he had to take medication for it because it was so bad. But he was also said to have recently joined a gang, and that is when his personality began to change, and he was said to have stopped going to school, and he would kind of lash out at people. He punched someone in the face at a party for absolutely no reason. So while investigators headed over to Christopher's home to interrogate him, they also wanted to talk to Daphne about exactly what she had seen that night because she wasn't really going into detail. Her father, Angelo, warned her not to say anything because he was going to pay for a lawyer to get there, but she didn't listen. And in fact, she said she would take them to the exact location where this body was found because they had not yet found Micheal McMorrow. This location had not yet been released to the public. No one would have known it besides the killer or somebody who had spotted him there, obviously, but this hadn't happened much later than his murder. So Daphne then walked investigators to that exact location and showed them Michael's dead body floating in the lake. When they were pulling his body out, she screamed out at him, "I tried to help you. I tried to give you CPR." But what she would say next was what would officially connect her to the murder, because that's when she said she knew this man, Michael, that she had actually met him in an AA meeting. This really surprised investigators that a 15-year-old would have been in an AA meeting at all. However, Daphne's father had much to inform them on. At this point, both Daphne and Christopher were arrested and charged with second-degree murder, as well as robbery. And the district attorney actually said that he didn't believe that they would be convicted of first-degree murder, which is why they weren't charged with it to begin with, since they were so young. That was the main reason, the only reason why. Daphne continued to say that Christopher was responsible for it all, that she had just witnessed it, and she claimed that the motive was jealousy, that they were on LSD and that Michael had, put his arm around her or touched her, and that made Christopher jealous enough to start stabbing him and ultimately kill him. She said that she was afraid of how Christopher was acting that night, but yet when they talked to Christopher, he said the opposite. He claimed Daphne was the one who committed the murder. But then Daphne calmly admitted that she was the one who informed Christopher on what to do. She said that although she didn't kill him, she did tell Christopher to gut the body so it would sink. Meanwhile, news was spreading fast about these baby-faced butchers, or that was what they were being referred to as, due to how young they looked. They were young, but they looked even younger. And those who knew Daphne and Christopher had no problem talking about them and how strange they were when they were together, how odd they acted when they were around each other. They claimed that Daphne was especially unpredictable and rude, and that she had quite the attitude. She was always trying to act like she was from the wrong side of the tracks, like she had this horrible upbringing, like that made her tough, when in fact she was from a very wealthy family. And sometimes she would decide to flaunt that instead and show people money and show them how, she was important because she had that money. She was said to often drink, and then she would try to pick fights with strangers walking down the road, and she would get angry with her friends when they didn't back her up on these fights. Many believed her behavior was actually a ploy for attention. In fact, one time while her and her friends were at Central Park, a woman was actually attacked, and a reporter came to, of course, ask people around about the crime, how it made them feel, and Daphne was picked to talk. And she actually told the reporter, "This makes me think not to trust a single person." Many of her friends stopped wanting to be around her by the time she got into this relationship with Christopher, but they weren't technically official. You see, Daphne and Christopher had met at an AA meeting as well, and their parents had both forced them to go due to the fact that they were only 15 years old and already getting into these substances. Now, they were hanging out with the wrong crowd of people, and they were both headed down such a dark path that they actually were taken out of school, separately of course, and entered into a rehabilitation program where they had to basically stay all day long. So at nights when they were free, they would go to Central Park and end up just drinking and partying there anyways. Instead of committing to the program, they committed to each other, and Christopher appeared to be madly in love with Daphne, wanted nothing more than to be with her forever. Yet Daphne wasn't really as committed to him. She kind of played with his heart, put him on the back burner. Friends said that they were on again, off again, that Daphne would flirt with other boys just to make him jealous and then go back to him, and she didn't really ever want to make her mind up about him. They were also said to be the complete opposites before Christopher changed, because Daphne was really always said to kind of have this rebel streak, this dark side to her, but Christopher was known to be a religious, quiet boy who was the kind to find homes for stray dogs. He would go with his grandmother to church. He was on time for school every day. But when he started to slowly change, Daphne only accelerated that. Like I told you, Daphne wasn't a good influence, and even her parents could attest to that. You see, her father Angelo and her mother Catherine had decided they wanted a child, and they were thrilled to get into the world of adoption and help raise a child who didn't have a home. So 15 years prior to this, they were informed of a little baby girl who had just tragically lost both of her parents. Now, I believe this was in a car accident, but I could not find anywhere to confirm this once I thought I had read it. So I just know that they died tragically, both of them at the same time. The baby was okay, and so the baby was put into the foster care system to be adopted by another family. She had become an orphan in seconds, and she was looking for her forever home. So these two were a match made in heaven, or so the Abdellas thought. They were immediately ready to adopt this beautiful baby girl, and Daphne became their daughter. They were enamored by her from the very beginning, loved her so dearly, wanted to give her everything they could, and with the money they felt like they really could. She went to private schools, she took exotic vacations, she could have anything she wanted. However, the Abdellas began seeing things that were very off about Daphne from the very beginning, and she was a hostile little girl, especially towards them. In fact, she began to scare them. On multiple accounts, Angelo and Catherine had told people that they were afraid of the daughter they had raised as their own, and they had no idea how to help her, change her, or help themselves. She was short-tempered, she would verbally and physically assault them, and this was on a daily basis. In fact, her father was so distraught at how she was acting, had no idea what to do or where this was coming from, that he actually took out a restraining order against his daughter because of the violence she was inflicting on him. If you've watched me, you know that I have a huge background in dealing with adoption and the whole system. It's a huge part of why I feel so passionate about telling you the truth as to what could have been happening here. And that is that there is a huge community of adoptive parents who have dealt with this very thing. The fear of an adopted child. Now, before I get any further, let me make this very clear. Not every adopted child is like this. Not every foster child is like this. Many are more than happy to have a family. They grow up to be the most loving, respectful, amazing human beings filled with love. These children, the ones like Daphne, they are ones that have and can instill enough fear in grown adults, entire families, that these families are seeking help in any way they can. This is a child with reactive attachment disorder. But for the families dealing with it, I can tell you that it is about the equivalent of dealing with a domestic violence situation. And I do not say that lightly. I do not say that jokingly. I know how severe that is. Some professionals will tell these type of families that this has never happened with an adopted child before. It must just be you and your family. There must be something wrong here with you. But that's a lie, because this has happened many times and continues to go unnoticed as well as silenced. And that's why I speak on it so often. I cannot say for certain that this is what the Abdellas went through, of course, because I haven't talked to them, but I can say that the similarities that they have to the communities of these adoptive parents is uncanny. And not every rad child escalates to murder, but some do, I won't lie. And that's exactly what Daphne did. Her family wasn't surprised, and neither were her friends. I mean, they said that she often talked about murder and slicing people, and the night of the murder, she actually said the exact words, "I'm going to kill someone tonight." It happened, but no one believed it was going to because of how many times that she would make up these stories and be so dark and angry. While the couple was in jail, their attorneys, of course, prepared for the trials, and Daphne's attorney, named George Winbaum, then stated she would be pleading not guilty. He said that she witnessed the stabbing but was not an accomplice. He said she's a sympathetic individual charged with a heinous crime. However, it had come out that Daphne had told Christopher to, of course, gut the body so it would sink, but she also helped destroy Michael's identification card and told him to attempt to cut off Michael's hands so that he couldn't be identified by his fingertips. Now, of course, this failed and they were able to get his fingerprints, but she did tell him to do this. 4 months later, that September, Daphne finally told the full story. She said that Christopher went with her to rollerblade at Central Park that night, and that they always did this after getting out of their AA programs, like I said, but she then showed Christopher her switchblade and said that she wanted to slice someone that night. And that is when Daphne said Christopher pulled out his own knife and told her he was in. They were drinking quite a lot, and then they soon joined a group of people who were drinking as well. They came upon someone they knew who was actually telling a story to a whole group. His name was Irish, and they knew him from AA, but this was actually the nickname for Michael. That's what he went by during these AA programs, and unfortunately, he had been doing what he did almost every night that night, which was the same thing Daphne and Christopher were doing, walking around drinking in Central Park. They asked Irish to go to the lake with them at around 11 p.m. on May 22nd, and he did willingly. They sat there drinking for a while before Daphne said that they began to threaten him with their knives. Daphne said that Christopher then began stabbing him several times, and she was actually kicking him in the legs to push him down, which is when Christopher jumped on top of him and continued on. She said that Michael was begging them to stop, and that is when she told Christopher to slice his throat from ear to ear. They didn't stop going at him until his entire body was mutilated, and then Daphne said she had a plan for disposing of Michael and that he needed to be gutted because he was a fatty and he would float. Thankfully, even though they did do this, his body still floated. Around this time, an officer had heard screams from a male voice near that lake, and shortly after saw two individuals rollerblading away. Over a year and a half went by before the convictions, and Christopher's trial was being delayed because his attorney was describing extreme emotional disturbance. He had to undergo psychiatric tests at Bellevue Hospital, and basically they wanted to determine whether he was sane enough to stand trial. But Daphne at this point was given a plea deal, and she was going to get manslaughter if she pleaded guilty. There was nothing else she had to do. She didn't even have to testify against Christopher. When she entered the room of her court date, she actually turned around and smiled at her disturbed parents and mouthed "I love you" to them. She said during the trial that she had struck Micheal to cause some serious physical harm, but she didn't mean to murder him. Daphne said it was a fight between Christopher and Micheal that started it all, but she didn't know what the fight was about, only that she did kick his feet out from under him, which is how he was on the ground, why he fell over, and she was still not taking responsibility for what she had done. Both Daphne and Christopher were only 15, possibly 16 at this time, and for two teens in New York, they would have only been allowed to be sentenced from 3 to 10 years. However, they were both being tried as adults for this murder. Christopher was found sane enough to stand trial, and his blood had also been found to match with blood at the actual crime scene. There was also a knife matching the knife wounds found in his home that had Michael's blood on it. He had also given 4 confessions to a psychologist, but these were all thrown out and not shown at his trial. But Christopher hadn't gotten a plea deal like Daphne did, so he was still being tried for second-degree murder. However, he was then acquitted. Daphne's voice was heard on a friend's answering machine, taking responsibility for the murder of Michael. But even with all of this, they were both found guilty, but only for manslaughter, and sentenced only to 10 years in prison. The jury said that they both gave confusing statements and little details, and that none of them knew whether it was Michael who stabbed him that night or whether it was Daphne, and Daphne refused to testify, making it harder for them to say she was guilty and make their final decision. So they ended up giving them 10 years. And they were both sent to the Albion Correctional Facility. Michael's family, who had been at the trial this whole time, were so angry, and they said there were at least 35 stab wounds and it took a half hour. How do you come up with manslaughter? This jury didn't have the guts to make a hard decision. They took the easy way out. After the convictions, Daphne actually stood up saying that she was sorry, that she wished she could go back to the past and resurrect Michael. She said, "I was wrong for being in the park at night. I was wrong for drinking underage, and I was wrong for the admitted actions I took. As much as I wish I could go back into the past, I am dealing with the circumstances as best I can." Since this case was so huge in the media due to them looking like such children and being so evil, even more people who knew them even vaguely began coming forward just to, get in the middle of everything, to get their name out there. But they had also gave some interesting information. And people who had seen Daphne around her apartment said that she was kind of a self-conscious teenager, an angry girl. She showed up to school out of uniform. She was always, on drugs, high, drunk. She just seemed like she had this typical, teenage phase that she was going to grow out of. Christopher was known to be on antidepressants at the time because his parents were going through a divorce. He was also quite paranoid because he had been jumped by a few teenagers on a subway, and so after that he started carrying around his own knife to protect himself. It was believed by the public that Daphne was the mastermind of this and that Christopher basically carried out the murder for her, that she manipulated him into doing whatever she wanted by, having this back and forth of, loving him and then not really liking him and doing that over and over again. He craved her attention and he would do anything to get it, even kill. Some people even said that possibly she was flirting with Michael that night, trying to get a reaction out of Christopher, and that he entered a jealous rage, or possibly Daphne told him to go after Michael, or she just encouraged him to continue once he started. They were both denied parole 2 times while serving their sentence. However, Daphne was known to be the perfect prisoner working in the industrial training program. She planned to work with children when she was released. Christopher was the same. He completed a high school diploma. He completed an alcohol abuse program. He had a clean record besides a violation for smoking, but that was only 1 time. And he was a good inmate as well. But 6 years later, it was 2004. And they had 3 more years to go, or so everyone thought. Now, they were actually paroled that January instead. It was huge media news. They both went back to their childhood homes. Christopher's brother actually had to fight a reporter who was trying to get too close to Christopher while he was moving back in. Daphne was going home with her father because her mother had passed a year prior, so it was just going to be the two of them. But Christopher soon after disappeared from the spotlight altogether, was not heard from again. But Daphne just couldn't stay out of it. See, 2 days after her release, she headed back to Central Park, to the crime scene. She sat down on a bench nearby the lake and left a note saying, "Rest easy. I tried to save you. I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you and your family." This was actually found by one of Michael's friends who had gone there to mourn his death. And as soon as he saw that it was signed D, he ran to the doorman of the apartment building and he asked if she was back. And he said she was. He said, "Personally, I think she should have left that to God and not have left a note on the bench. I understand she wants to make amends, but that's not how she should have done it." Another of Michael's friends say 6 years is nothing. It's a travesty. Knowing they were in prison was cold comfort, even though I knew someday they'd be out. I've lost all my trust in the system, but it's hard to not wish them well. In a sense, I'd like to believe they were rehabilitated. His family actually refuses to speak on it, and both Daphne and Christopher had a curfew, and they can't leave the 5 boroughs of New York. But then, just a few months after, in October of 2004, Daphne was found to be making death threats to a woman in Brooklyn. I don't believe it was ever released who this woman was, why she was making the death threats, but nothing more was ever really said about this. Then 5 years after this, in 2009, at 27 years old, Daphne was living on the Upper East Side when she got into a car accident. She went on to sue the couple for her injuries, which included her having to be confined to her bed for a while. She said she suffered serious injuries and great pain due to their carelessness, and she was looking for financial compensation. I was unable to find whether she received that or not, but that is all that I could find about Daphne and Christopher. But what do you think really happened that night? Would Christopher have killed without Daphne? Will Christopher kill again? Will Daphne? Let's hope not, considering they are out roaming the streets of New York City, living normal lives. But I'd love to hear your theories on it. Please be kind, as I will always be respectful of your opinions if you are respectful of mine. And I hope that I have brought you a new case that you hadn't ever heard before. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Also, reminder to check out my second channel, Genuine Gems. It will be linked in the description, where I do vlogs and different kinds of beauty and personal videos. Okay, bye.